Cool. Good to go. Cool. All right. What is up, you guys? Welcome to the Of Like Minds video podcast, episode 8. Super special friend of mine, graphic designer extraordinaire, UCLA, among many things, Deniza Sabio. Thank you so much, Deniza, for joining us today.
Thank you.
And just for the audience that doesn't know, this is about like the 15th attempt at doing this. So here we go. We're praying for this one to go through. So just kind of starting us off today, Deniza, just talking a little bit about where you grew up and what that was like navigating through that.
Awesome. Okay, so I grew up in Carson, California. If you don't know where that is, a lot of people don't. It's in between like Torrance and Long Beach, California. Way bigger cities, but we're like literally like 1/3 of what they are. But growing up there is awesome, even though it's so small. It really like helped me grow as a person. It really helped me value being Filipino, and just like really brought me into loving everything about other people of color and learning about them growing up. I've lived in Carson my whole life. Like my family lived in Carson. I was born in Torrance, came back to Carson like that day. And it was a lot growing up in Carson. Something I am really happy about is I grew up with a lot of different types of friends, but we all had the same values. I also grew up with a lot of my cousins who I felt like we were each other's backs through everything in this life. And like with my friends and my cousins, we both like just having that in general really created who I am and like the values I knew that I wanted to like uphold as I got older. But yeah, growing up in Carson, I think was a learning experience for both myself and my parents too. They came from the Philippines. A lot of Filipino values still instilled with them, but they also grew up in like the Long Beach area. My dad, West Covina, and it was just a lot of like them being immigrants and also trying to understand like this American life and like with like the hurdles of like gang relation and like who they were as people in this place. So it was a lot of learning on my part and knowing who I wanted to be based off of the people I grew up with. So a lot of my classmates, I grew up with a lot of Filipinos. I grew up with a lot of Mexicans, Samoans, Blacks, but never white people. Like Carson, even though like, even if you look on Wikipedia, it says that there's a lot of white people that live in Carson, but those people don't go to our schools. Like they go to like the schools like in Torrance, like in Palos Verdes, the really rich areas with like way better teachers, like more of that. Even just to go to say like Carson High only had 6 AP classes. That's all we had compared to like when we went to college. I would talk to friends and be like, yeah, my school had like 48. I'm like, 48? What kind of stuff are you learning there? Like it's just like a lot of like growing up and realizing that, wow, I guess I did live in a really low income area where a lot of the things I learned was really based off of like what our resources were. And like a lot of like, just living in an area where like a lot of people were either like really gang related, like into gang relation, or a lot of things that was really prominent was like my classmates getting pregnant. It was so normal. But I guess like from that, like even though like that was such a norm, it like really helped me build up to like, okay, that's like not really the path I want to go to, but it also like humbles me a lot because it's like, I know those people. I've known them since preschool, kindergarten, elementary school, and I know they're great people, but like it really helped me focus on like, it's a really big reflection on what's going on in the world right now and how people like see people and they just assume of like who they are. But just knowing like and growing up in it, like it keeps me really humbled. It reminds me like those are people that you really relate to, even though like we didn't end up in the same situations. Like everyone in Carson feels like family, even though like we're not family. And like that's why like like when we were at UCLA, we were repping so hard like Carson like all the time, like because like it's hard to get out of there, and it's hard to like get out of this system where like you're gonna stay in Carson forever, you're gonna have those same friends, you're gonna raise your family there, and it's gonna be this cycle of the same exact thing over and over again. I mean, it's just sad because Carson has always been like that ground where like I always hear it on other podcasts too, where like of like YouTubers that they're like, oh yeah, I used to go to Carson, I used to gangbang there. Like my like homies would go there just to like mess with other people and like mess with other gangs. And it's so crazy because even though I grew up with that, like I didn't see it as like a scary or negative
Well,
thing.
yeah, I was just gonna ask
Yeah.
you, like, what was that like, being exposed to that? Just pretty much that was what you knew and kind of, I
Yeah.
guess, almost normalized. So what was that like
I
growing up with
mean,
that present?
it's so odd to say because, like, I mean, I would, like, in middle school, that's when I started to see it more. Like, I'd see some of my friends come and, like, they were, like, jumped the night before or they had, like, burn marks on their, like, arms and stuff. And, like, for some reason, like, it would concern me, but I don't know why, like, even though it was around me, it never scared me because I think, like, I knew who those people were. Like, I knew they were still, regardless, really good people. And, like, this like gang culture, like nobody, like I feel like where I'm from, like it's normalized in a way. Like it's definitely not as prominent as when we were younger, but like it was just one of those things where like, especially the Filipino gangs in Carson, like it was just like all of us were still like family. And like when they noticed like one Filipino was down, like they'd be like, like isang baksak status, like we're gonna
Yeah.
like, like take care of our people. Even though like say I wasn't even like remotely like in that space, like I had a classmate that like he always had my back, but he was super involved in Filipino gang life. So it was just like I knew he was a great person. It's just unfortunate that that happened. And I think it's like a lot of that happens in movies too. Like you'll see like a kid like who was like basically getting raised up in like this gang culture but has another friend who's super like opposite of that, but like they kind of balance each other out kind of thing.
Mm,
I don't know if that makes any sense, but I think from that too and from what I've learned, still seeing like a lot of my friends that I grew up with, like that lifestyle, even though like it really defined them as kids, like living in Carson, like everyone's just trying to be better and trying to
of
get out of
course.
like this stereotype that like, oh, like because you're from Carson, like you're gonna end up being there forever. And like, I mean, we've seen a lot of like our parents go through that. Even like one of my teachers, he went to Carson High. He was in a Filipino gang, and now he teaches at Carson High. Like it's just like full thing. It's just kind of like this like mentality that like we need to hustle because we're not as big as like Long Beach or Torrance, but we're still our people and like we represent. And I think that like even though like it was in different forms and in different ways, I think it really shaped me to be like, okay, like I know what I want for myself, and I know that like if I want to be anything I'm setting my mind to, I really need to work hard for it. And I think that's something I really loved about being from Carson. Like, even though it takes people different amounts of time figuring that out, like, I've seen so many of my friends who were like, didn't give a shit about school. Like, now they're nurses and they have families. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I don't even have a family and kids
Yeah.
yet. Like, they're like,
Yeah.
the paths that like everyone has taken has been so different. And like
Mm,
till this day I'm still learning a lot about where I'm from, and like seeing like, oh, some of that gang culture is coming back and it's kind of scary, but at the same time
yeah.
like it's gentrifying and it doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
But
Well,
yeah.
I mean, a big part too about being home and all this being exposed to, a diverse amount of people.
Yeah.
Growing up in that environment, what was the support system like at home? Growing up.
Oh man, my parents, like, it was like I don't know how I got to like wanting to be so good in school. But my parents just like were never the type of people to push me to be like the best or better. I think something that like really helped a lot was like this, just having my parents not trying to tell me what to do. Like they always were
Mm,
like really open to like being like, hey, like you want to do that? We'll try it. Like, let's do it. But also there was also like that feeling of utang na loob where like my parents like struggled as kids trying to like figure out how they were even gonna like feed my sister and I. So it's this idea that I think I've instilled in myself. My parents have never told me like, you need to be better, like you need to get straight A's. Like I like put that on myself because like I just see I saw the struggle of my parents like trying to make a better life for us, but like it took them so long to finally get there. And like I was just like, okay, I like really need to change my lifestyle around. And like just having that support, like I think I created my own fear because I feel like my parents have always been supportive, and it even comes down to like changing my major in college. I
Yeah.
was like so scared to tell them because like it was this idea that like, wow, like a Filipina from Carson got into UCLA and she's going to be a pediatrician. Like she's going to UCLA to be a doctor. And like no one in my family is a doctor. So like we were like, oh my gosh, like this is a big thing. And like when I had that realization, like, oh my gosh, this isn't what I'm meant to be doing. And like I like went behind my parents' back and like applied for the major, and I took classes like when I should have been taking science classes, but I reverted all my schedule to design classes. So
Yeah.
I was like, okay, like I'm doing this behind my back. They're basically like, like paying for college under their name, So I
Yeah.
was like, oh, this is scary. And then when I finally told them like, I got into this major and please don't get mad at me. And I was like crying already. And my mom's like, why are you crying? Like, we've never told you like what you needed to be and what you had to be. And I was like, oh my God, that's so right. Like, why was I so
Yeah.
scared? And then even I was more scared for my dad, he's military. He was in the Navy and the Air Force. And I was like, oh my God, like, it's just order and like structure all
Yeah.
the time. So like telling him, he was like, why are you crying? Like your mom's right. Like we've never told you to do good in school. You did that by yourself. Like we're not going to tell you who to be and like what to do. And I think because I had parents like that growing up, like it really set me aside from like a lot of the people who grew up in Carson with really harsh, like
Mm,
Filipino parents that were just like, you need to be the best. Like we came to this country kind of thing to like give you a better life. And I never got that conversation with my parents.
well,
Yeah.
I mean, I know that your parents had you and your sister when they were young. So I
Yeah.
think just what was that dynamic like kind of going back before we get into undergrad and stuff, but what was that
Yeah.
just like growing up with young parents and for you being Filipino and for them to almost not be the typical Filipino parents where they're pushing you for academic excellence? Like what was that
Oh,
like?
it was amazing. My because like I think like my parents, because they were so young and like they weren't experiencing life at all, they had to raise us. Like they really used that and were like, we're going everywhere and you're gonna learn so much. We're gonna go to all these museums. We're gonna like learn with you. Like I think that's something my parents like felt like they really missed out on, like a real education. So
Yeah,
like
yeah.
they really like wanted us to know more about the world. Like they didn't get to travel. They had to raise us at such a young age. Like my dad
Mm,
only joined the Navy because my grandparents were like, nope, you're 18 and I don't care if you're having a kid, like you have to figure it out. And like my dad was like, oh my God, I can't even like go to college. Like how am I gonna get a place to like what resources do I have that I could get an education? So my dad's like, okay, I gotta join the Navy. Like I'm smart enough for the Navy. Like I'm like
yeah.
disciplined enough. So my dad made that sacrifice, and like I think for the better. Like my mom and dad like wouldn't have survived as like just like newly like just turned 18. Like my mom literally the day before turned 18 when she had my sister. So technically she was still 17. But like it's just I think from just having younger parents, they were way more understanding. Like they were like even my mom was like, come on, just take a sip, just live a little, like it's not
Yeah.
like she was just like these kind of things don't make you a bad person, like
Yeah.
just because like she was just like I was young, I wasn't there, not too far from like where you are now. Like she always reminds me that like my sister and I were really lucky to have them as parents because they really like just listened. I think that's
Yeah.
something that like was different like compared to like a lot of my friends who like their parents wouldn't even let them like have like a sleepover with like their own cousins. Like I was like very privileged where my parents were like, even when I started dancing, these dance classes would start at 8 on a weekday and end at like 1 in the morning because everyone was just like, dancing together.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
like the fact that my parents let me do that at like 14, 15, like
Yeah.
on a weekday when I had school the next day was like so cool. And I think like it really just shaped who I knew I wanted to be, someone very open and someone that like listens and someone that like I know I want to be like that when I get older. We're old already. But like, like just like reflecting that on like that kind of parenting, I felt like really made me who I am too. Just like
Absolutely.
they just were so amazing. And like, we always have those days where like, oh, our parents. But like I most of the time I'm like, wow, like my parents like really supported me. And like even though like it was so hard to like raise two girls and like them trying to flex like, like pretending like they had the money they could just to buy us like a Game Boy that they really didn't have to buy us, but they really
Yeah.
wanted us to have the life they didn't have, especially like having to grow up so
Mm.
fast with kids.
That's huge. That
Yeah.
that idea of giving what they didn't have is huge. And just to add to it too, I mean, not only did you have your parents growing up, but what was that impact of having the older sister in your life and having that, would think like a role model, right?
Oh man, I mean, it's kind of like my relationship with my sister. I'm like the older sister. She's 3 years older than me, but like from my sister's like mistakes and like seeing how my parents have like tried to discipline her through that, like all her mistakes, I'm like, okay, nope, I am not gonna like make the same mistakes as my sister. And like
Mm,
I think like just seeing like how they were like, oh, like they were never telling us what to do, but they're like, like just like if you need help, ask us. Or like if there's something like you feel like isn't right, like double think it. And like it really was like, okay, like I'm learning every little step. When I hear my parents like lecturing my sister as a kid, I'd be like, okay, that's what I shouldn't do. And like I need to be better. So if you know anything about my sister and I, we're complete opposite. She's super like out there and like parties and drinks. I didn't drink till I turned 21. I waited till my birthday. And
bless
like
you, bless you.
yeah, because like the amount of times where I'd be like my sister like would like get in trouble for like drinking in high school. I was like, oh my God, I just like don't want to disappoint my parents. Like I
Mm,
see how they're just like, oh, like it's okay to like experiment a little bit, but like just like the amount that's happening so fast, like I was like, okay, like I need to be that happy medium. And that's definitely going back to the idea of like just like, okay, I need to like really do this for my parents even though they never asked me, kind of thing. And
yeah.
like it's like that, like, oh, I need to be like better just so they know that like all this hard work like was for nothing, like it's not for nothing, like
Yeah.
yeah.
Absolutely.
Especially, yeah, it's scary. But I like put that on myself. Like, I don't know why, but I did.
Yeah.
Oh, your video? Oh,
Oh,
there you go.
always something. So you have a great support system at home,
Yeah.
from your parents in terms of the freedom of not having to be pressured into being something specific, and then you have the privilege and you know you're fortunate to have learned from your sisters, from her adversities. And so now kind of going in, and you also kind of mentioned earlier talking about the lack of resources at your
Oh,
school.
yeah.
And so what was that journey like navigating through high school and ultimately that pressure you put on yourself to pursue higher education?
Oh, man. I think like, well, it definitely always reflected on like how my sister did in school. So ever since elementary school, like even though I would say I was placed into like the honors classes or like the gifted and talented classes, my mom would take me out and put me into the teachers my sister had. So it was always like this idea that like, oh, my mom felt comfortable because she knew the teacher already. And even though like she knew that like I should have been in like honors classes, she put me in a way where she knew that like what I was going to be set up for. So my parents were really holding my hand a lot more because of what they learned from my sister. So I kept having to switch into like the classes my sister was in, and like every year they're like, Deniza should not be in this class. She needs to like be up there more. So I think it's just this idea that like I've always had my parents there, but it was always at the like extent where like they only felt comfortable because my sister went through it. So a lot of it too, like even going into middle school and high school, they were like, oh, you're Donica's little sister? Are you gonna be talking a lot in class? Like, are you gonna like, like you're gonna be an okay student, but you're not gonna be like the star of the class kind of thing. And like that would irk me so much because my sister, she's really smart, but she's not as like determined as I am. Like she's so smart. Like, and
Yeah.
I learned so much from her, but it was just like that push where I was like, okay, like, no, like I'm going to prove to these people and like my teachers that I am going to freaking succeed. And I did. And it was amazing. And they're like, wow, you're so different from your sister. I was like, regardless how different we are though, like it doesn't matter. Like she's my sister still. And like, she's still like, I feel like I am still a big reflection of who my sister is and like how we make each other better too. But besides that, like, yes, high school was so, like, because I wanted to learn a lot from, like, what my sister didn't do, I learned a lot from my cousin, Robian, who also went to UCLA.
Mm-hmm.
So her and my sister are also complete opposites. Robian was very high-driven in education, while my sister was like, I'm chilling. Like, I'm going to be cool. And, like, I always felt like that happy medium between them two. And I always had the expectation that I was just like everyone in Carson was going to go to Cal State Long Beach and life was going to be like great. And it was going to be all with all my friends still. And it was that expectation where I was like, okay, like what am I going to do to make sure I could go to college? So I like got involved way more in school than my sister did. Like I was a college counselor. I was a part of the yearbook. I was a part of journalism. Like I was in all these clubs. My sister was like, why would you join a club that's so like lame? And I was at school from like 6 a.m. to like 6 p.m. like every day because I was also taking like after school college classes.
Yeah,
but like
yeah.
from that, like, even though I was like so like involved in everything, my standard was still like staying in the lane that my sister was in, like going to Cal State Long Beach. And that was like my only goal, and I thought that's all I could reach because that's kind of something I was always around. Like my parents were like, oh, like follow your sister's footsteps. It was always something like ingrained in me. So the first college acceptance letter that came out was Cal State Long Beach, and I didn't get in. And I was like, what am I gonna do now?
Oh man, I didn't even know that. I did not know.
So I was like, I don't know why, but I was also like the top 4% of my class where like, you get to get into specific UCs, but like in my head I was like, the school that I'm supposed to go to I didn't even get into. And I was like, wow, I'm not gonna get in like anywhere. Like this sucks, like all my hard work. And like I was so jaded with the idea that like I was only supposed to go through this specific path because like everyone I grew up with went through the same path. So like the fact that I did get into UCLA was like, how did this happen? Like, oh my God, like this is crazy. I always felt like I was never that student to participate in class. I was so shy. Even though I knew the answers, like I just never wanted to feel stupid. And like it's just growing up like, like my family was never the type to be like, oh, like we're so like my daughter is the smartest. Like nobody in my family bragged like that on my mom's side. Nobody was bragging because like I grew up with my mom's side because they're all from Carson and we all lived in the same apartment complex. So we all went to the same schools. So it was all this idea that like, like I knew Robian was so smart. So I was like, of course she got into UCLA. Like I just never saw myself in the same realm as her. And like I was just like, wow, like I never realized how successful I was for myself and like all the decisions I did make to go one step ahead of even Robian, of joining like journalism, yearbook, and like just like never realizing that my teachers actually loved me as a student. Like I was always like, no, like I'm not that smart. like, I think it was just always this idea of like, I never thought highly of myself too. And I think that's something that also like I learned from my parents. Like, we never bragged about who we were as people, even my sister.
So how do you think then, when you finally get that acceptance letter and, that comparison to where I'm and being like, oh, like I may be on the same, like, what did that do for your confidence in yourself?
oh man, it like jumped like tenfold because like in high school, I didn't even realize I was doing well in high school until like junior year where they were like rankings are out. I was like, what's a ranking? I don't know what that is. Like, they're like, oh, it's like where you are in the class. And I was like, oh my God, they like announced that to like everyone. That's so weird. So when I found that out, and then like also knowing like and asking Robian like, oh, what was your ranking? And she's like, oh, I was like 7th. I was like, oh my God, wow, that's amazing. And like I was just like, just the idea that like I could get into the same school as my like really smart cousin. Like, I was so surprised because like there was just this idea that like everyone in Carson does what everyone in Carson does, like go to Cal State Long Beach, like do nursing and like, call it a day. And it just like, with that confidence, I was like, okay, I can freaking do this. Like, especially in high school when everyone was like, wait, I didn't even know Deniza got good grades. Like, because I was like, everyone was like so taken back when they found out I got into UCLA. They were like, I didn't even get in though. And I was like, oh, I don't know. Like, I don't know what like set us apart. But I knew that like I was doing a lot of the things I love to do, like in terms of extracurricular activities. Like as high school went on, I ended up not staying in the same clubs as all my friends, like National Honor Society or like all those like honor society stuff. Like I ended up joining clubs like photography club, human rights club, like things like I really like was passionate about. I was even like volunteering at church every Sunday and Saturday, and then I ended up teaching confirmation. So
Oh, damn.
yeah, I was a confirmation teacher during high school,
Oh my God.
junior, senior year, and like it was just things that like really like fueled me. And I think that's what helped me like really stick out on my applications. Like I was doing things that like really like showed who I was as a person. And with that, like just realizing that, I was like, okay, like this is giving me a lot of confidence. Like someone that doesn't know me and is reading me on paper is literally like, wow, like this person's doing so much. And like even though it didn't show through my high school friends, like a lot of like people who didn't even know me like really saw my worth. And like just getting into UCLA, I was like, whoa, that's like a school for movies. Like I was like not good, like exactly like how I was saying about like when I was younger, I always felt like, like a lot of these things were like movie based, like something that I couldn't achieve. And like I thought like a bunch of white people were just teachers and actors and actresses, and now I was gonna live this life where that would be my future. That's so insane. And like it was this idea like, wow, like I'm gonna have this privilege, and I never thought I'd have that privilege, and I really needed to take it and like run with it and like succeed. And like college is another story of like how that went through.
Yeah, so now we're going to UCLA, and you don't have that pressure that typical Filipino family would maybe suggest onto their kids. And so talk a little bit about, you initially went to school for what?
Okay, so I went in as a biology major and with the hopes of going to med school to be a pediatrician, because I thought that was like my calling. I thought that was the only way that like I could help the world with just being in the medical field. And like this idea that like also my parents just like didn't get to have their dream jobs of like, what they really saw themselves as kids being. And I was like, okay, I get to be here and I get to be that doctor that they always wanted to be, and I'm gonna freaking kill it, and it's gonna be so good. And oh gosh, like going into college as a bio major was a huge awakening. Carson High, just growing up in Carson did not prepare us at all for any college related thing. Like when I was like meeting up with classmates that were like, oh yeah, I got like 5s on like my AP classes. I was like, I didn't pass my AP my AP test because like no one told us it was so important to like pass those things. Like they were like, oh, it gives you 1 extra point for your GPA. I was like, shoot, I need that extra point so I could have a better GPA. But I didn't think that like it would really affect my college career. Like I just think back and I'm like, wow, if I just passed those tests, I wouldn't have had to take all these extra courses at UCLA to start off with. And it was a really like rude awakening going into UCLA, especially as a bio major. Like I really did like experience the whole like people are really selfish in South Campus, and like people were like, I am not sharing my notes. Like I do not care if you shared your notes with me. I always shared my notes. I would email like my classmates and be like, hey, let's study. They're like, no, like let's not do it. So it was like a really rude awakening for me because as much I was also trying so hard, like it just wasn't clicking, like it wasn't happening. And I was like, why is this not a thing? And then it became this thing where I was like, okay, like, do I want to be a doctor still? Like, this is so messed up because I'm going here as a bio major, like an impacted major. And like, am I going to switch my major? This feels wrong. And I feel like guilty because like, to myself, because everyone was like, oh my God, Deniza's gonna be a doctor, like the first doctor in our family. This is so exciting. And I was like, oh, this is a lot of pressure.
Well, when did you first ask yourself that question? Because I think that question is alarming and is like a first like, oh, like you just said it right there. So when did you first ask yourself that seriously?
Okay, so I did really bad our first year, and I let's just be transparent, like spring quarter, first year, 2012, I got like DDF. And I didn't even get like academic probation. I went straight to subject to dismissal, like straight to it. Like I didn't even get the buffer in between. Yeah. So I got that letter like right when I moved back home from the dorms our first year, and my parents opened it, and to make it worse, it's like a red letter on red paper.
Oh my God.
Yeah, it's on red paper. And I was like, my parents opened it, they were like, subject to dismissal. I was like, oh. And I was like, okay. At first I was like, I was just way too involved in like Samahang, and I was also volunteering with prep and like doing all these like, and I also did culture night. I was like, oh my gosh, like I just need to like get rid of everything. But I was like, no, like those things like fueled me, and I learned so much about myself through those things. So I was like, okay, like to me, like I had to take a step back that whole summer. I was like, okay, I need to retake math because just in case I don't get like into anything and I have to stick this out, I need to like really up my game. So during the summer, I decided to retake my math class that I got a D in. But like it was that summer that my parents were like, you're living with your grandma, you're going to commute to UCLA from there, and you're going to take summer class. Yeah, and you're going to take that summer class. And it was like I worked so hard to like during that summer, like I wasn't going out, I was studying. I went to the library. I would stay up at my grandma's house like every night, making sure like, okay, you're going to pass this freaking math class, and like you're going to do it. And but from there I was also questioning like, oh my gosh, I'm working so hard, but like is this something that really like makes me happy? Like so I like really stepped back. I even talked to some of my teachers in high school, and they were like, yeah, we didn't know why you signed up to be a bio major. I was like, what are you talking about? You should have told me this in high school. They were like, we're not going to tell you like who you should be though. So they were like, you really need to think about like what makes you happy. And like I stepped back and I was like, okay, I was so involved in creating things like ever since middle school. I was in my middle school yearbook too, and I was just like in journalism and like all these like photography yearbook classes, and I was always designing like flyers for school. And I was like, I just like don't know why I didn't realize that was a real job. Like it just seemed like, oh, like the real jobs are like what we've learned growing up, like doctors, lawyers, and like dentists. Dentists was a big one for the Filipino community too.
Yeah.
And like, you know, like I just never thought art would be somewhere I would be successful. And I think that there's somewhere along the lines where we're like secretly taught that like art anything isn't gonna like get you to like any form of success. And I think like I was like, that's not a career that like it's gonna like help me raise a family one day. I can't do that. But I really like looked back at it and I was like, okay, like I'm okay at this. Okay, like let me try like seeing what design classes UCLA offers. So like it's so hard to get into those classes. They only accept like
10 people,
17,
right? 10,
like
yeah, I was
yeah, like
really low.
17 people. And like I was like, okay, like who do I contact? Like that whole summer while I was studying for all my that math class and living with my grandma, I was also like, okay, what are my options? Like, should I be an English major? Should I do anthro? Like, if this isn't gonna work. And I was like, okay, what is design? Like, I need to like do something in my wheelhouse. And like, I was like, okay, let me look up this one professor. And I just got lucky and found her email. And I was like, hi, I'm Deniza. I'm a biology student and at UCLA. And like, I was reading up on your course and I was really interested in taking it. She was like, oh, like these classes fill up really quick. Like if you don't get it, like I'll try to add you to the wait list. And she goes, but the wait list gets so big too. And I'm like, okay. But like, because I was letting her know, I was like, this is like in my head, like a big career change before the career even happens. And I told her like my story and like, she pulled some strings and she got me into the class. And she really talked to the counselor, the DESMA counselor. She was like, this girl really needs to take this class. Like, I want to teach her. So because of this professor, like she was like the person that shaped my DESMA career. I ended up getting into that class and she ended up really liking me and like really seeing like my potential. So I ended up being able to take another one of her classes, even though they like hold these classes just for DESMA students. Like she was like always fighting for me to like get in it. And I was like, oh my gosh, like, am I gonna apply for this major? Like, is this gonna be a thing? And I would talk to her about it. And I was like, I'm really scared because, I already started off the school year, like this was all second year happening, like still, and me trying to get off academic probation. And like, I was like, oh my gosh, like, am I even gonna still be at UCLA? Like,
well, yeah. So wait, really quickly. So for academic probation, what were the requirements? Like, did you have to have to pass immediately, or was there a certain like grade letter? Like, what was required of you?
So for 3 consecutive quarters, you have to maintain a specific GPA. I believe it was just over like a 2.5. So it wasn't like crazy, but like because I got like DDF, like my GPA was like 1.3 because of that.
So you just had to be perfect, essentially.
Yeah, I just had to like maintain that. Like I left all the clubs I was in. I didn't do culture night. I was like, you know what? Like Deniza, like you're paying for your education. Like as much as these clubs like fueled you, like this isn't what you're paying for. Like initially, like at the end, like I was like, okay, I need to really work towards my future. And I really need to like settle down. Like these friends will always be here. And they're always going to be a support system in a different way. So I really like had to sacrifice, just like a social life in general. And like I really wanted to focus on bettering myself as a student and really finding out what I wanted to do, because my whole life I thought I was going to be a pediatrician. Like every Christmas, like some form of doctor like toys were given to me. So it was just like this idea that I never knew anything else, even though I was like, I loved drawing and stuff, but I was like, that's just a hobby. Like, that's whatever.
But I think just even with you scaling back and taking yourself away from these spaces that really moved you, how did that affect you positively and negatively?
Positively, because I felt like I really found myself. Like, I felt like I was so honed in this idea of like whenever I was in a space, like I had to be like in that space. Like if I was fighting for like Filipino rights, like I needed to be like empowered forever. But there was also times where I let myself step back and be like, okay, like, are you doing it like because like you like, how do I explain this in like the best way possible without like putting shade to like anyone? It was just like a lot of like, you know, seed planting within the organizations we were in. And it was just like this idea that like, of course I care, but to the point where like it's affecting me, and like it's like this switch of who you are and like the values you already like had for yourself. So for me, it was a positive because I stepped back. I like felt like I was in my own clear mind again. And I felt like, oh my gosh, like it's nice to be able to think for myself, to like not be like, oh, I have to go to this meeting and I have to participate because that's what this meeting's for. And like I have to put on this like thinking cap all the time of being like just like politically correct and like fighting for like my community every single second of my day, like filled with that. And like I guess the negative towards that is that like I did kind of like fall off of the face of the earth second year, but for me it helped me grow more. Like I grew up more from that because I was relying a lot on the relationships I had. Like I couldn't even study by myself. I needed to study with people. And I was like, okay, I need to grow like on my own and like really branch out from this space because I really relied on it for like every little thing. Like even being like, let's go get a sandwich at BCAF or something. Like even though I could have totally done that by myself, you know?
Yeah.
So it was a big learning experience, just like separating myself from that while still like supporting in a way I could. Like it actually, because I separated myself from it and was like trying to be a DESMA major, I offered a lot of like, hey, let me try to remake the Samahang logo, or let me make this flyer for you guys. Like I just wanted to still help, but in a way that it was still helping me like grow as like like the designer I wanted to be. And like a lot of trial error, I look back at those graphics, I'm like, freaking hideous, why did I make that? Like but yeah, it hurts so much to get separated from that, but I needed to do it for like my own mental health too. Like it helped me grow so much. And just when I became a DESMA major, it changed everything about like what I knew in college too.
Well, when did that officially happen?
Oh.
You becoming a DESMA major, and then what was the rest of that journey? What did that look like?
Yeah, so I applied, I believe in like October through November of our second year. I was still in my first DESMA class, and I was like, okay, she knows who my professor has seen my work. I'm gonna make more work on the side to up this portfolio. And then like we wouldn't have found out till winter quarter, at the end of winter quarter. And I was like, you know what, I should still take a DESMA class, because like what if I get in and like I'm gonna be too behind going in as a third year. And I was like, okay, I'm gonna apply, F it, like if I don't get in, I'll just leave UCLA, it's fine. I was like ready for that decision, even though it like was so painful. I was like, I'm not gonna pay for a university education if I don't know what I want to be yet. And like I didn't want to just settle for a major just to have a UCLA certificate. That was like the hardest pill to swallow, but I wasn't gonna waste my time and my parents' money if I was just gonna go there and do nothing with that piece of paper. So I applied. I was taking classes still. I was waiting for the whole application process. And then I actually, the way I found out wasn't even through an email. My professor, the one I was talking to you about, she didn't know I was in the classroom. I was like their Big Mac like screen. So I was just like, whenever I wasn't in class learning about it, I was truly forcing myself to be like, okay, how are you gonna like be as good as all these people in this major? Like, how are you gonna stick out? So I was always in the classroom, like forcing, like being like, okay, like how could you have made that better? Or like, let's like up this and like make stuff for yourself. And she didn't know I was there. And I hear her whispering, she goes, hey, to like my TA, she goes, Deniza got in. And I was like, I was just like behind the computer, like, she was like, yeah, like my professor.
Wait, so she didn't know you were there, or she didn't
No,
see you? Okay.
she like, I was behind like all these like big monitors and she didn't
That's
see
what it
me.
is.
And
Yeah.
like, I'm like in my laptop, like this. And then I was like, and then she was like, yeah, like, I really like, she really fought for me. She was like, I've seen her in class. She has so much potential. She was like, she's not the typical art student who's going to be like, this represents this big thing. Like she was like, she really cares about the construction of her work. And I was just like, oh my God, I got into this. I was so like taken back because the year before I applied, they accepted no change of majors. And within every year, they try to only accept like my 40 students out of like everyone in the world. So as of change of majors, you're also competing with the high schoolers coming in. And I was like, oh my gosh, I'm not gonna get it. This is like too good to be true. So I was like already looking into like community colleges and like what I can do to like really like help my grades get back up. And then like just finding that out, I was like, oh my God, I'm gonna be a designer. This is fucking crazy. Sorry, can I cuss on here?
Yeah.
Okay. But like, like I was like, my gosh, like I've always just been the type of person that never thinks like she's like the best at anything, or like I never cared to be also like the shining star of anything. So for that moment to happen and for that switch of like, oh my God, like you are actually so worthy, it felt like getting into UCLA all over again.
Wow, it's powerful.
Yeah, it was like, because I didn't think I was worthy enough to go to a university, but the fact that like the pool got even smaller and that I even had a professor who saw so much potential in me and like fought for me, like meant so much. And I was like, oh my God, like I can do this. That's why like it really reflects on like who I am today in terms of finding a career in design and graphic design. Like it's always pushing and realizing like I need to really believe in myself, and like that's something I didn't grow up a lot doing. And like it's something that like I'm reminded constantly every day. Everyone's like, Deniza, you're way better than you think. And you need to really remember that like there's so many people that are backing you up and like praise you a lot, but like I think like it's just like for me it all started with like humble beginnings. And just like always like reminding myself that like there's always room for growth, and I always feel like I'm still learning and like progressing, and I'm never gonna get to that point yet. And I think that's what always like strives me to be better, because I'm like, I gotta work.
So that transition going from South Campus major, North Campus, and now you're in the DESMA major, what would you say are some of the biggest takeaways from your time in DESMA that are still applicable in your career today?
Oh man, that transition. I mean, for me, I think that everyone thought that just because I was switching to be an art major, a creative, that it was going to be so easy. Like it's going to be, and it's not time consuming. Hell, I was working on projects and spending so much more money as an art major. And like, any artist in general, like we're paying for our own materials a lot of the time. And a lot of it is like, we work on our own time. It's not like we're just working a 9-to-5 job and we could leave our job like at where it is. Like that's still something I take, like that's still not really takeaway, but still haunts me is that like people still to this day think like just because it's like a creative job that it's always fun, and that it's not as hard work as like everyone thinks it is. Like, yeah, I'm not like, like saving someone's life in terms of like, like at a hospital, but like I feel like a lot of people forget that like, even though we're doing something creative, it really takes a lot of our mental health away. And
Yeah.
like, I feel like a lot of people just think like, you're doing something fun and you're doing something you love, like what's there to be stressed about? But it's always something to be stressed about. I mean, even as a dancer, there's new dancers coming up and like trying to like create, like, I was just talking to a friend about it, where within the dance community, like if you don't got that follower growth, like who are you as a dancer? Like it really reflects like popularity now and like
Yeah.
being the best. And it's just like everyone's like, you should post more of your graphics online, and I'm like, I'm not doing it to like get recognition like that. I'm literally
Yeah.
doing it because I love it, and I'm putting the effort into it because I genuinely care about it. I'm
Mm.
not trying to gain like an audience all the time, you know, like it's something I feel really passionate about. And I think that's something that like a lot of our South Campus friends were just like, oh, but like you're doing something for like fun. Like I think even like it
Yeah.
goes to
Yeah.
like with you too as like a whack major. I don't think they realized that you guys didn't just dance all the time.
Yeah. That's a big misconception, but yeah,
Yeah.
you know.
And like I knew that because like, you know, I knew that from you. I knew that from Caitlin. I was just like, you guys realize that like they're not dancing all the freaking time. And
Yeah.
it's like also like that with like DESMA classes, like they're like, you're writing essays. I'm like, yeah, because we're supposed to learn about these things too. And like there's a lot of reading involved and like learning about like people that we should know in this industry. And it's not like I'm not working as hard as you just because I'm making art. Like it's still to that day, like, you know, I still have a lot of friends that are like, oh, I had such a stressful day because I worked at the hospital today. I'm like, great. Like, I also had a stressful day because I worked supposedly 9 to 5, but I worked overtime with freelance stuff and I don't get to sleep and have like that separation of work and home
Oh,
sometimes.
of course. And
Yeah.
it's all relative. I mean,
Yeah.
for I know you as well. We have the utmost respect for, you know, our friends that were South
Oh,
Campus, North
yeah.
Campus. It doesn't matter. I think it's just
Yeah.
everything is difficult and presents its own challenges. So
Yeah.
I think a big thing too that would kind of speak and help, you know, the audience, whoever's tuning in and listening, is you kind of spoke about it, but just you're passionate about what you're doing
Yeah.
and you love it, and it still presents its daily challenges, but kind of talking about post grad life, being an artist, and kind of I think there's this mental shift that we have to go through and think of ourselves more as a business, because we're more about selling our product and our skills and what we have to offer, and trying to make that sexy for a company or whoever.
Yeah.
So what was that transition like post grad, and honing and owning like you are an artist, and trying to market yourself and all that stuff?
Oh man, it was so hard. I mean, I think like any creative, when we start off, we like lowball ourselves like so hard. Like any price we set is so low because we're like, oh, like, you know, I'm just starting out. And it's this like idea that we're like, we just need to get our foot in the door as best as we can. But I think like it was so hard for me because I was like, oh my gosh, I'm like making no money off of like something like this, when like people will be charging like 20 times the amount that I would be like,
Mm.
you know, charging. So a lot of it like, oh, I mean, I started off with jobs that I was not proud of like at all. Like I for a lot I was working and like I was photoshopping jerseys onto like middle schoolers, and like I was like making bookmarks. I was like, this is not what I went to school for, you know? Like
Yeah.
even though like it was like so easy and it was like something that I felt like I could like get better at, I was like, okay, this is like content and like things that I'm producing that I really don't care about. And
Mm.
like I was like, okay, but I need to build up my portfolio. So I ended up going to like a full-time job that was very underpaid. But I like worked so hard because I was like, okay, we gotta like ramp up this portfolio. Like, let's do it. So I was working for like the vape industry. And
Hmm.
it was just like a lot of like, wow, I don't even vape. But
And you
like
were still commuting, right? You were still commuting at this time. You weren't even living, so it kind of just feel shed some light on like
Oh
where
yeah.
you were commuting from. You had a long commute, I think, right?
Yeah. So I I ended up working at UCLA like right after we graduated. And
Mm-hmm.
that was for UCLA women's basketball. So a lot of what I was making, the graphics were just targeted towards like sending to recruits, like, hey, come to UCLA, look at you in this UCLA jersey, it's so amazing. Uh, but I was commuting from like where my parents moved, so Eastvale, like Corona, Chino Hills area, to
So that's
UCLA.
like what, like in 45 minutes, an hour 15? What is
Oh
that?
boy, with traffic,
2 hours?
like 2.5 hours for
One
like
way.
a 56-mile drive one way.
How
But I
long did you
was,
do that for?
and this was only part time. I
How
did
long did
this
you do that for?
like 6 months. Yeah,
That's tough.
it was really tough, but I was like, it was the only job I could find, like right out
Mm-hmm.
of college. And I was like, okay, I'm like really scared. I need to pay off my loans. I need to find like a real job.
Yeah.
So then I ended up through someone in Samahang. They worked at this vape company and they were doing like their like social media stuff. And they're like, hey, we need a graphic designer. And it's in West Covina. I was like, oh my gosh, that's halfway from LA, West Covina, and here.
Mm-hmm.
So that's such a better commute. And from there, I was making like $13 an hour. Like,
Yeah.
I was like, oh wow, I thought we get paid more than this, but I guess not. Like, I guess I'm just gonna have like a really like I'm just gonna stick in the lines of like a 25K to like 35K thing my whole life. Like, I was like, wow, did I make a mistake being a designer? Like,
Mm.
as much as I loved it, I was like, wow. And then I was making content that I wasn't passionate about. I was like, oh my gosh, I have to like Photoshop like vape clouds on these like around these peaches, and I was like, what am I doing? Like, this
Yeah.
is not what I thought I was gonna end up doing. So I let myself like, you know, like save up as much money as I could. I worked so hard. Any opportunity of OT at this company, I was like, gotta do it. Just
Yeah.
like save, save, save. And then I was like applying to jobs like every week, like 10 a week for like a whole year and hearing nothing. Yeah,
Yeah.
I was like, oh my gosh, like I suck. Like I'm not a good designer. And I was like, but I always, something that kept motivating me was like, okay, the things I'm making through this company is not a reflection of what I could actually make.
Mm.
So that was something that like till this day, still like with the stuff I'm making at the current company I'm at, I still remind myself like, this isn't reflective of me, but I need to put some spin of myself in this somehow. And from there, I worked after that, being at that vape company for like a year and 3 months, with only one raise of like 50 cents. I I got a job in downtown LA, which the commute got bad again. So I was like, oh, that's fun. I went crazy though. Like I worked for a fashion company who claims to be a
Mm-hmm.
startup tech company, but they sell clothes. So it was a lot of very like people that just don't value their creatives at all and don't understand like the value of like what we make for them and like how we're kind of the face of like what's going on. I mean, example, like as a dancer, like there's a choreographer, but an artist or musician is showing off those dance moves and they're like, wow, that dance is amazing, but they're never going to think like, oh, someone choreographed that for that person. And
Yeah.
you know, like it's like that. And it's just this idea that like even though we put in so much work into like creating all these big things that's like the face, we're never paid correctly, or we're never like noticed for like the things that we create for these things. And it sucked. And that company, it was like a lesson learned, and like I learned a lot from there, but it was definitely a place where I it got me to the point where I was like, this is where I'm going to stay forever, huh? Like this design world is not what I thought it was going to be. And like I was freelancing on the side too because I still wasn't making a lot of money. And I was like, oh man, like, or like not even a lot of money, just like money to like pay for like gas. I was commuting so far. And I was
Yeah.
like, you know, like it's those things where like we're sacrificing because like it's something that we love. And like I didn't, and like my dad was like, why don't you just work for this company? And I was like, Dad, like I don't want to make PowerPoints. Like, that's not like what makes, like, what fuels me as like a designer, you know? Like, I don't want to make brochures about like parts that you could buy at this company, you know?
Yeah.
And like, I told my parents, like, this is the sacrifice I need to make right now. Like, fashion and people are going to see this portfolio more as a whole, that I could do more things because like it involves like a brand. So from there, I was like, okay, I need to really leave this job because I was running, like, one, I wasn't making enough to like, I was living paycheck to paycheck with like, after every paycheck, only like $30 left on my account.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh my God, because I bought a car because I couldn't get to and from because the cars I was using was like breaking down.
Yeah.
So it was just a lot of like adjusting life with like still wanting to find happiness in a career and like still like finding myself as a designer too. Like, I feel like I'm still figuring that out today, but just like being like, okay, like this isn't who I am. And I really need to like work for a company that has the same values as I do and like really respects like women and like the hard work that like women can do. So from there, I ended up at my new job, which surprisingly, I never thought I would get to the income I'm at now. Like, they offered me like 2.5 times more than I was making. And I lowballed myself when they interviewed me. I was like, oh, you know, I'm just looking for like, maybe like 45K, like, you know, and they were like, oh, okay. And I was like, okay, like that'll save me a little bit more. Like, with the lifestyle I'm living, I could like end up being okay here. And then the fact that like I finally got to a company that actually like values the people that create their content is, I just never thought that was a thing because of everything I experienced like after college.
Yeah. Can you disclose, I mean, just a little bit about just what the name of the company is that you work for, and I guess a little bit about what you do?
Yes. Okay. So I work at a company called POPSUGAR. It's like this really big social media company that like really hones in on like fitness, celebrities, gossip, home, beauty. But the main focus is to really like highlight women and like how amazing women are. And it's the first company I've been in where it's basically almost all women, and it's just like a lot of women supporting each other. So I was like, wow, this is amazing. Like, and always trying to find ways to highlight women in general, like, is amazing. And I felt like so heard for once in like a place of work. But what I do basically, like, I purely just make Instagram stories. Like, that sounds crazy. I'm literally just every day making Instagram stories. And this is the first job where like I have a title and I'm actually only doing that thing. And every place I've worked, like, you know, you have to make so many different things and they try to give you so many different hats. But this is the first company where I'm like, they really care. And they're like, I was like, wow, like, I feel so grateful to finally like find a place that like values what I'm making and understands like it's not easy. And it takes so much time and it takes so much thought and creativity to like put text on a rectangle, you know? And like at POPSUGAR, like, you know, I've been through 4 bosses. I've only been there for 2 years and 2 months, but I finally have a boss that is a designer as well. And oh my God, the difference of like working with a boss who's actually a designer how they understand the process of making something is a huge difference. Everywhere I've worked, I've never had a boss that was a designer ever. So they were like, isn't that just going to take you like 15 minutes? I'm like, no, I still have to like animate it and I still have to like draw some stuff for it, or like, you know, you still have to like look at everything and I have to think about the colors. Like, say if I was talking about meditation and I made everything super dark and black and red and like it wouldn't have made sense. It like really takes a lot of effort and like trying to convey a feeling through like someone looking at a graphic. And yeah, that's what I do every day. I make Instagram stories from like really like fun games to like working with clients such as like Target or like Sephora, and like them being like, hey, can you please make an ad for us? Like, we really want to be featured on your Instagram. And I think it'd be really great for your viewers to like utilize this discount that we have, or like, oh, we have a new collection, we really want to show it off. Can you like make an ad for us? And I'll be like, sure, okay, let's make it fun.
That is amazing. I mean, just
Yes.
working for a company, especially as an artist
Yeah.
who values you and who pays you appropriately
Yes.
and who respects you, I think that's huge. And I think that alone in itself is the dream. And I'm just, you know, couldn't be happier for you, because that
Thank you.
it's I think the thing is, people, we see kind of where we're at and we kind of never really see that journey. And so
Yeah.
you've been through a lot, especially like in your career and being so young still. So that's just incredible. But I think I also want to get into a little bit about what you've also done, that we've kind of collabed on a little bit. And I know a couple years ago I reached out to you about creating a logo for me, and I talked about doing clothes, and I'm always trying to do something different. And actually, for the viewers or whoever's tuning in onto this, Deniza is actually the one that designed the logo for the podcast, which is really awesome. And so I think just maybe talking a little bit about your creative process. I'm a very simple person, and I kind of gave you a color scheme in terms of just like simple, and I kind of kept it open. I really wanted you to be have your just your creativity just kind of take over. But if you can just, kind of just describe like what your creative process is as a graphic designer, and like kind of how you go about that.
Ooh, okay. So like, I mean, as a designer, like something I love to do is ask people like, okay, what's the purpose of this? Like, because that's most important. Like, I feel like it really needs to reflect like what you want to convey. So
Mm.
like, I really like make sure like when I'm talking to like a client, I'm be like, okay, tell me about it. Like, why did you start this? Like, what's the reasoning for it? What do you want people to gain from it, kind of thing. And like it's my job as a graphic designer is to really like take your brain and like mix it with mine and like find a
Mm.
way where like that can like you have an idea, but a way for me to find a way to elevate it in a way where like it's like legible for everyone and like they can feel that same feeling. So specifically with this project with you, like we had a great conversation about like why you wanted to start it, like where you were coming from, and just like the growth that you needed for yourself for it. And like how like you were just explaining that this is supposed to be a thing where like you want people to like realize the journeys we go through, but you also want to show that like, dude, like there's going to be similarities for everyone in some shape or form, regardless if like someone's reading this or like listening to this
Mhm.
and like they don't want to be a graphic designer at all. I think like just the process of like getting there and like
Mm.
the similar struggle. So I was like, okay, like you and I, like we relate a lot too. So in
Mhm.
terms of just like growth and like figuring ourselves out. So I was like, okay, like how do I take this and like really like make it something I also feel like I like. And like,
Yeah.
yeah, because like I know like we initially started off with some ideas and I was like, okay, like how can I like incorporate this? But also wanting to make sure, because when I make the logo for someone, I'm like, okay, I want it to be able to stand by itself. I also want it to
Mhm.
be like timeless, it's like something that like if someone sees it, like they're gonna know like, oh, that's Kevin's podcast, and like that's awesome. And like I felt like when I really think of like a name of something, it has to make sense and you have to feel it. So like, when we talked about like what you should go about like naming it, like that was like the first thing I came to mind, because like we were having such a great conversation. Like every conversation we have, I feel like we always find a way to relate back to each other.
Mhm.
And I think that's like so important. Like just in any conversation, just like having that line where you're like, wow, like we grew up in different places, but in a way we're still like the same people. And like we still have like parallels in some way. So I was like, oh shoot, what's a great name for this podcast? And I was like, oh, and also something that sounds really dope. I think it sounds really dope. But
Mhm.
like, and then from there, like I'll take the name, I'll write it in so many different fonts that I'm just like, okay, like I'll have like a whole list, and I'm like looking at it, I'm like should it be capitalized, lowercase? Like, does this need to be fixed this way? Like, what are ways that'll like really show like the vibe and feel of this? And it just so happened that this both had like two eyes. And I was like, okay, like I need to like connect these like somehow. Like it just,
Yeah.
yeah, it's like it's speaking to me in a way where I was like, that's important for some reason. Like it felt really important because I was just like, it like two circles like connecting. And it's like, you know, you're always going to be like connecting with someone in different ways, even though you're two separate words and like in two separate worlds too. Yeah, like when I try to see a design, like I don't want to overthink it too. Like I feel like when you find like that little like spark that you're like, oh, that makes sense. Like,
Yeah.
and like it just worked. And I also like in the terms of design, like I was like, okay, even though he has this like written like what's it called, logo, I also wanted to give you the option of having like a logo that could stand by itself too.
Yeah.
And like people would be like, oh, I know that logo, like I've seen that logo so many places, and that's what that means. Like it's a connection, it's like it has something to do with like two people coming together kind of thing.
It's awesome to hear like your creative
Yeah.
process, because I'm like,
Yeah.
man, like being creative in a different art form is just, I can relate, but I can also, I'm still wowed by like all the intricacies and all the little details that are going into this. So pay your artists well, y'all.
Yeah.
I do want to kind of tie this around to your journey. Is you've gone through a lot, and everyone has, and specifically you being an artist, is that something that you and I will always have in common. This is a difficult time that we're living in right now, and I couldn't imagine being a student or a kid going to school during this time. So with that in mind, and with everything you've experienced in your journey, and all the spaces, all the different environments that you've been in, what would you say to your 13, 14-year-old self, if you could just talk to you back then, or even just any 13 and 14-year-old, just someone younger, whoever could be tuning in, what would you tell them?
Oh man. I think like I would definitely say like, you know yourself more than you think. You know like what makes you happy and what fuels you. And like even if you feel like something's like a hobby or something that you can't achieve like at all, if you know deep down you really want to like work on it and like work so hard on it, like do it. That's something that I felt like I was always just holding myself back from like becoming more creative, because I was like it felt like it didn't matter at the time. And like I just like had like these set goals in my head, but definitely like know your worth, know what you love, and have an open mind. Like always have that open mind about who you are and what you want to make and what you want to be, regardless what field it's in. And if you want that, like really work on it. And like it's not going to be, you know, quick. It took a lot of like perseverance and like really reminding myself that like my feelings and my thoughts and my values matter. So it's just really trusting yourself and being open to trusting yourself.
Mm,
Yeah.
that's huge. That's big. Real quick, Deniza, I know that you have a website, and I think that you have like your stuff up there. So if you don't
Yes.
mind just sharing with us the name of that website, and we'll link it in the description too. I think your work is incredible, and it's just, as a fellow artist, I'm like, I could never do that, and it's just amazing to me to see. So if you could just quickly share with us like your website, or talk about it, just if you want to.
Yeah, I mean, oh my gosh. So my website is just denizasabio.com. So really easy, straightforward. It's a lot of work that I feel like I've accumulated over time, and it's definitely, like as I said, still growing process. So a lot of my old stuff, like as much as nostalgic as it is, like I really want to show the designer I've grown into. So it's a lot of like still work in progress always. Everything in my life I feel like is always going to just keep like one upping itself, and that's always my goal. Even with my website to one up like what I had previously uploaded. So that's my website. It's cool.
Yay, cool. So we'll definitely check that out. But
Yes.
Deniza, thank you again so much for giving us your time today. It's incredible to hear your narrative, and I hope that whoever's listening and tuning in can use this as inspiration. Whether you're an artist or you're completely identified with someone else, I think there's so much to take from Deniza. You're so awesome. So thank you so much for your time today, Deniza.
Thank you.
And thank you guys for tuning in on episode 8 of the Of Like Minds video podcast. We will catch you guys next time. Thank you.
Thank
Later,
you.
Deniza.
Bye. Do I stop recording? Do you want me to keep recording?
You can stop it.
Okay.